lean back. Can lean back a little bit. It's not as complicated as last week's Sikha by a stretch, and I know that we're all going to enjoy this very beautiful Sikha. So it's Parshas Tetzave, Chelek Tezayin L'Kutei Sichos, Tetzave Beis. And if you look into this week's Parsha, in Perek Chav Ches 28, and we're going to look at the Psukim beginning with Lamed Aleph 31. So 28:31, we have the discussion and the description of the Me'il, of the robe of the Kohen Gadol. And it says, Vasisas Me'il ha'ephod klil tcheles, make the robe of the ephod completely out of greenish blue wool. And then at Pasuk Lamed Beis, it says, its opening at the top shall be turned inward. Its opening shall have a border all around. The border shall be of woven work, like there is around the opening of a coat of armor, so that it will not be torn. So around the neckline, kind of, it should be made of sturdy material, and it should be woven work so that it can be taken on and off easily without doing damage to the garment. And Lamed Gimel is actually the pasuk and the Rashi that we want to look at. The pasuk reads, "Va'asisa al shulav rimayne tcheles va'agamin v'tala ashani al shulav saviv ufa'mayne zahav b'seicham saviv." On the hem of the robe, you shall make pomegranates of greenish blue wool, dark red wool, and crimson wool, and these should be placed around the hem, and there shall be gold bells between them all around. That's the pasuk. Rashi says, "Rimayne pomegranates, agule v'chalulim hayu." These pomegranates were round and they were hollow. Ha'asuyim kivetzas tarnagolas, and they're shaped like a hen's egg. Upamayne zahav, zogin im in bolin shepatecham. Bells with clappers inside of them. So clearly they're going to make noise. B'seicham saviv, beineim saviv, meaning between them all around. Between two pomegranates would be one bell attached and hung at the bottom of the robe. Okay, so now let's begin with the Sikha. Aleph. B'negei le'me'il, regarding the robe of the Kohen Gadol, Nemar Bakasav, it says in the pasuk which we just read, Vasisa al shulav rimayne tcheles goimer, you should attach to its hem pomegranates made out of 3 colors of wool, the first of which is techeles, al shulav saviv, and this should be placed on the hem, around the entire hem, upamayne zahav b'teicham saviv. And as Rashi explains, between every 2 pomegranates, there would be a bell that had a clapper inside of it. And this would encircle the entirety of the hem. Uperish Rashi, and Rashi explains, that although the pomegranates were round and they were hollow, mikol makom, still in all, pshat hakasuv pamayne zav b'teicham, when the Torah says that there should be the gold bells within them, this does not mean that the bell was found within the hollow pomegranate. Ella, rather, beinehem, between them. Okay, because when you read the psukim, when you read the pasuk and you read the words upa'amayne zahav b'teicham, and golden bells between them, it could mean one of 2 things. And Rashi disabuses us of thinking that it means that the bell was placed in the pomegranate, and he tells us the bells were placed between the pomegranates. Between 2 pomegranates, 1 bell, davok v'talui b'shulei ha'me'il. And they were attached to, and they were connected to the hem of the coat of the Kohen Gadol. V'hikshal kach haRamban, and the Ramban questions this. Lefi perusha shel Rashi nimtza, the Ramban teaches that according to Rashi's understanding, we find sheloi hayu harimaynim misham shim klum, that the remainder were not actually the pomegranates were not actually used for anything. In other words, they were not functional. They were more decorative. And if this is true and they were only for decoration, so why were they made hollow? If you're not going to place a bell in them, if they serve no practical function, why make the pomegranates hollow? They should rather be made like golden apples. The Heshiv Hara'im, and the Ra'im inserts himself in this dialogue between Rashi and the Ramban, and he says, Lo yadati, I don't understand, I don't know. Lama bachar tapuchim yesim harimayim. Why is the Ramban saying it should be apples rather than pomegranates? In other words, why is he choosing this fruit over that fruit? Okay, so far we have Rashi's position, we have the Ramban who questions if they're anyway just decorative, why not go for apples? And then you have the Ra'im who says, I don't understand, I'm agnostic on this issue. Why choose apples over pomegranates? Okay. Ubiru mifarshim. So the super commentaries explain, Shekushias Haramban, he benegei leprat shel chalulim. That what's bothering the Ramban is not so much the type of fruit, but rather what really makes him stop and pay attention is that Rashi says that the pomegranates were chalulim, they were empty, they were hollow. What's really bugging the Ramban, the Mefarshim say, is that if in fact the pomegranates are hollow, because you're not putting the bells within the pomegranates, so why make them hollow? Why not make them solid? But the Rebbe says, the Rebbe says, but it's still not understood. If in fact this was so, and that Ramban's only question was regarding the hollow factor, if it's true that the only thing bothering the Ramban is that they're hollow, then why would the Ramban have said, Yasam kimin tapuchei zahav? They should have been made golden apples. So the Rebbe feels that no, the Ramban is questioning not just the hollow factor, but the fact that it's pomegranates and it's not apples. Beis. The Rebbe says we might have been able to explain all of this in the following manner. Matzinu, we find that regarding the menorah that was in the Mishkan, hayu linai, it was quite elaborate, the decorations of the menorah. And for decorative purposes, there were givim, cups, kaftairim, knobs, uprachim, flowers. And I recognize that there are other ways of defining these Hebrew words. I just chose what I looked quickly to see was the most predominant definition: givim, cups, kaftairim, knobs, and prachim, flowers. The kaftairim hayu kimin tapuchim, and the knobs were in the shape of apples. So if, according to Rashi, the pomegranates were only for decorative purposes, so the Rebbe says maybe we could explain it that since there were knobs in the shape of apples for decorative purposes on the menorah, and since what was on the bottom of the hem of the coat of the Kohen Gadol was also for decorative purposes, so why not match it? Make it apples also. If apples is a motif in the decorations of the Mishkan, make it consistent, make it apples also. But the Rebbe says, but the Rebbe doesn't accept this explanation that the Ramban is just bothered that it's not matchy-matchy. And he says, it's still not understood. First of all, Aleph, The fact
I'm sure she'll realize that she's offline and come back on in a minute. Okay, so if you didn't see the chat, she didn't realize, but she's coming back in a minute.
Okay, I'm going to do this by phone until my computer responds. There's something wrong with my computer. It's frozen. It's not letting me do anything with it. Can you guys hear me? Yeah, okay. Okay, so I will go back to the last two questions in Seif Beis. I think that might have been where I started to freeze.
I think you froze before the first question, just after the first paragraph.
Okay. You know what? I'm going back to the beginning of Seif Beis, just for coherency's sake. The Rebbe says we might have been able to explain this inconsistency because we find Matzinu Shebemenaira Hayu Lanoi Gavim Kaftarim B'Prochim, that regarding the menorah, the pasuk tells us there were cups, there were knobs, and there were flowers. V'hakaftarim hayu kimin tapuchim, and the knobs were in the shape of apples. So we might be able to say that what's bothering the Ramban is that if you have decorative apples on the menorah, why not make the decoration on the hem of the coat of the Kohen Gadol also apples, so it will match? But the Rebbe says, but that doesn't explain it enough. But that is still not understood. Aleph, Hagufa, this very fact that there's apples on the menorah and there's pomegranates on the bottom of the hem of the coat, Tzarech Biur, this begs for clarification. Al Shuma Korach Hanoi B'Tapuchim Dafka. Why were there specifically apples on the menorah? And Beis Ladas Rashi, and if you go according to Rashi's opinion, Mawa Tam Lekach Shebemeil Hayu Rimoinim Lenoi U'B'Menorah Hayu Tapuchim. So why by the me'il, by the coat, there should be rimoinim, there should be pomegranates, and the menorah should be apples? What is the difference? I'm trying to get back into class in the normal way. Give me 1 second and let me see if I could do this. All right, it's going very slow. Gimel, the third seif. So now the Rebbe switches for a moment from the pomegranates to the bells. And he says that regarding the bells, the pasuk tells us, "V'nishma koiloi b'voye el hakodesh," and his voice, or in this case, it means his movement should be heard, meaning the Kohen Gadol's movement should be heard when he comes into the Kodesh. V'ad kedei kach hayadavar nagei l'avodas Kohen Gadol, and this is so important to the avodah of the Kohen Gadol that it says, "Sha'al yedei v'nishma koiloi," that if his movement will be heard through the agency of the bells that will jingle or tinkle, hayamuftach asher v'lo yamus, then he is assured that he will not die. And Rashi says, umiklal lav ata shomea hein. So from the negative, you hear the positive, meaning if he has the bells and he won't die, then you hear already what would happen if he doesn't have the bells, God forbid. So obviously the bells are very, very important. B'tzarech lahavin, so we have to understand. Mipnei ma inyan silsil hapamoinim v'nishma hu hekrech b'voya el hakodesh. Why is the tinkle or the jingle or the clang of the bells so important? Why is this sound so important to be heard? Why is it so imperative when the Kohen comes into the Kodesh, when he comes into the holy? It would seem on the contrary. We have a very, very famous pasuk in Shmuel regarding Eliyahu, Loi berash Hashem, that Hashem does not appear where there is a tremendous amount of tumult and noise. Ki im bekol demama daka, but confronting divinity, spirituality, really happens in the low, fine voice, kol demama daka, without fanfare. And actually, the Rebbe says, we find by the Kohen Gadol himself, that when he went into the Holy of Holies and Yom Kippurim, at that time, the Kohen Gadol donned not the ceremonial clothing, the Big Day Zahav, what's called the golden garments that he would wear on a regular basis, but he wore white garments, and there was no coat, and therefore there were no bells attached. The call up on man, there's no jingle of the bells. Haramban kasav b'tama davar, and the Ramban addresses the reason for why there have to be bells, and he writes, "Shahaba b'hechal melech pitom chayav misa," that if somebody comes in to the inner sanctum of the king suddenly and without prior warning, he is chayav misa. He's deserving of death. The kol hapa'amainim hu me'ein netilas rishus. And the Ramban explains that the noise, the jingle, the tinkle of the bells was a way of asking for permission to enter. Lehikones, to enter, v'la'asoik ba'avoda, and to engage in the work. Give me just a moment. I'm going to put down my phone, try to get in by the computer because it's just much easier. And hopefully now my computer has calmed down and will let me come in. No, it's not working. Okay. So why is it that the Kohen Gadol does not need permission when he comes in to the Kodesh HaKadoshim on Yom Kippur? It would seem that on Yom Kippur, when he's going in, not just to the Kodesh, he's going into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, he's going into the inner sanctum. You would think how much more so he should have to ask for permission through the agency of the tinkle of the bells. But why not? What we learned from this is that we're told, and the Rabbeinu Bechaya brings this down, and this is based on the Gemara, that on Yom Kippur, Hashem shows us the spectacular exaltedness of the Jews, that we don't need a shaliach. We don't need to send a messenger. We don't need bells that tinkle to say we're coming in. The ein heim zkukim lepa'amainim lahashmiya kol ka'adam sheshaleach shliach lahidiyah shehu ba. On Yom Kippur, we don't need the bells, which would be like a person who sends somebody ahead of themselves to say, I'm coming. We don't need that because Yom Kippur is a singular energy and because of our closeness to Hashem on that day. Ulafi perish that. So in accordance with this, nimtza we find, she'inyin v'nishma koiloi shebepa'amainim einoi chelek min ha'avoda. So if we're going to go with this theory, that the bells are simply a way of announcing I am coming into the inner sanctum. So if you adopt this thesis, then the bells are not part of the avoda per se. They are rather hachana. They are preparatory. Elarak hakdama v'hachana la'avoda. They are simply a preface and a preparation for the avoda. Amnam, however, says the Rebbe, me'achar shekol prat b'shaychus la'avodas kohen gadol hu b'tachlis hadiyuk. But because we know that every single detail of the avoda, of the service of the kohen gadol, is precise, umikol shekein prat sheyesh by oynesh misa. And we have to say that this is especially true for a detail that carries with it the very severe punishment of death, God forbid. Umagam, and especially and especially because if you think about it, then you will understand that while the Kohen Gadol was working, the bells would tinkle as well because they would respond to his movement. Mistaber, so the Rebbe says, so it's more logical to understand she'inyan v'nishma koiloi, that the idea of hearing the noise coming from the Kohen Gadol's coat, negeya la'avoda gufa, is actually part of the service of the Kohen Gadol rather than just a preparatory step. And if so, we have to understand the importance of the pomegranates rather than the apples.
To the rabbi.
Okay, I'll tell him. Thank you, Rob. Okay, let me try one more time. Give me a second. Let me try to get on my computer one more time.
If you don't get your computer, get yourself a pushka or something to lean your phone on.
That is a great idea. I'll try that next. I'm just trying to see if I can get in like a mensch. It's loading.
Recording in progress.
Okay. Shut my phone. Sorry that I am so. Okay, sorry about all of that. Oh. Okay, I am thoroughly convinced that I need a new computer. This one is just too old. Okay, so in Dalit, the Rebbe explains that the whole idea of or what's understood normally about why you need the belt is to ask permission to come in. And fine, okay. But the Rebbe says that it doesn't satisfy him because this would seem to indicate that this is just preparatory and it's not part of the Avodah. But of course, the Rebbe believes that every detail is part of the Avodah, and especially because you hear the tinkling of the bell during the Avodah, because as the Kohen Gadol moves around, you hear the tinkling of the bell. So there has to be more to it. And so then, of course, we go back to why pomegranates and not apples? Dalit. The Echad HaBi'urim Bazeh. One of the explanations is as follows. HaKohen Gadol haya oiseh avodas b'tur shaliach shel Klal Yisrael. The Kohen Gadol was, after all, a shaliach, all of Klal Yisrael. Uperish hadavar hu memela shebevoyoi b'knisasai el hakodesh haya noisei imoi pnima as Klal Yisrael el hakodesh. So beautiful and poignant that because he was a shliach of Klal Yisrael, it means that when he came into the Kodesh, he carried with him into the innermost sanctum Klal Yisrael. He brought every single one of Klal Yisrael el HaKodesh. Move on. So it's understood. Umevur bekama mekomes, and it's explained in a number of places, Barucha at length. Asher avodas baalei tshuva, that the avodah of baalei tshuva, haba mitzad harichuk, that comes from a sensation of being far and alienated from God. That's what catapults somebody into doing teshuvah. There has to be that initial understanding that I have wandered, that I am not where I'm supposed to be, that I am at a distance. V'teichana, and so the content of that kind of response is bricha mipnei hara. It's about running away from the negativity that one is enmeshed in. And this is nas is mitoich rash. And when a person runs away from something that they understand is dangerous, negative, noxious, that is done with rash. That is done with tumult. That is not done slowly and with a quietness and with a subtlety. It's ka'adam ha'bereach mipnei sakanas maves. It's more likened to a person who runs away from a fatal situation. Bitza'aka, with screams and cries, ubiruach sa'ara, and with a searing wind. In other words, if somebody's, God forbid, drowning, we don't expect them to just be sending very subtle messages up. They're screaming, they're thrashing about, they're flaying their limbs. That is what it looks like. That's what it sounds like when you're running for your life. It's an involuntary movement that you scream, that you make a rash, that you make noise. ועל דרך זה ישנו סוג זה של עבודה אצל כל אחד מישראל. And in like fashion, each one of us, every Jew, has this modality of spiritual service. Even somebody who doesn't have averos or is not aware of the fact that they've done averos. So this is one of hundreds and hundreds of places where the Rebbe explains that tshuva is an avodah that has to be done by everybody. It's not just there are Bali tshuva and then everybody else is just fine. Everybody else is just great. There's Bali tshuva and there's tzaddikim. No, Rebbe explains that these are two modalities of service. And this has to be done by everybody. Even one who seems at this moment to not be aware of having averos. When a person contemplates how far they are from godliness, either because the nefesh habahamis is strong, is kicking and screaming. So maybe they have it under control, but the nefesh habahamis is still going strong. And therefore, there exists a different energy, a different possibility that is separate from godliness. Or the Rebbe says, you still have to do tshuva. Or the Jew who has already completely taken care of his nefesh habahamis, but he is aware of his nefesh elokis. That's also a yesh. That's also a metzias. That's also a sense of independent existence, which a priori means there is something else besides Hashem. And for this, he should be feeling a distance. Okay, so halavai, that everybody should be on this level, and this should be our challenge, that we've done everything, and now we're at the level where we feel our nefesh elokis, and this is a problem because there's a metzias. There's some other existence here, and it's not just kulei elikus, it's not just completely godliness. But the Rebbe says, even if it's this on this subtle level, on this exalted level, but even if the only problem that you have is that you feel your nefesh elokis, that's still a form of metzias. It's still a form of something that exists, and there is not complete bittul. There is not complete abnegation and loss of self and the subsuming of the self in godliness. And hopefully, when he feels this, mis'erhu b'kol rash gadol, he is aroused. He feels the danger of this, and he seeks to escape from this situation. And it's going to happen b'kol rash gadol. It's going to be a noisy process. Livroich min matzav zeh, to run away from this situation. And like the Baal Shem Tov replied to those who claimed that it was unseemly for the Hasidim, the way they davened, that they made all kinds of movements with their bodies when they davened, that this is undignified, that this is unseemly. So the Baal Shem Tov, in reply, said, "Shahadabar hu b'dugmas adam hatavea b'yam," that what the Hasidim, the way they're expressing themselves when they daven, is like a person who feels like they are drowning in the sea. And a person that is drowning at sea is going to make all kinds of movements, and he's going to scream with all of his strength to bring this to the attention of somebody who could come and save him. So yeah, he's not going to be just waving like the queen, he's going to be thrashing about and splashing in the water, and it's going to make noise. And the Baal Shem Tov said, and for sure, somebody looking at this will not be making fun and will not be saying disparaging things about this person's screams and this person's movements. You understand that that's the only way they can save themselves. And the Rebbe says, "Ve'ein hadavar b'stira l'divrei hakasav loy b'rash Hashem." And by the way, the Rebbe says this is not contra. This is not a stira. It's not a contradiction to what it says in Shmuel that Hashem is not found in the noise. Ki hadir bazehu loy birash havaya. Because the specificity of the words of that verse is that the level of Hashem, of Havaya, of Yud-Ke, Vav-Ke, that is not with Rash, that is not with noise, meaning, in order for a person to be a vessel to receive the level of getlichkeit, of godliness, that is the level of Shem Havaya, the Yud-Ke Vav-Ke, that is higher and that transcends all the spiritual worlds. Yes, that level has to be dafka welcomed and can only come to a person in the still, small voice. That's true, because there has to be complete bittul, there has to be complete abnegation of the self. Masha enke, but a contradistinction. Kasher havoida dayan krucha bevricha min hayeshes v'amatzius. But the Rebbe says, but when you're not on that level of the shem havaya, when you're still busy running away from the yeshus, from that sense of independent existence, and at that level you reach, I'm saying only quote unquote Shem Elokim. It's a lower level of manifestation. It's the Shem Elokim, not the Shem Havaya. By the Shem Elokim, there is place, so to speak, for Metzius, for independent existence. Hine avoda zu nasis davka birash v'chule. That level of avoda is done davka with noise, because again, on that level, it's noisy, it's messy. You're trying to put distance between yourself and this very dangerous spiritual situation that you realize you find yourself in. That's going to be with noise. There's a higher level after that. That's the Shem Havaya. Yes, that has to be with the Kol Demamadaka. Now the Rebbe returns to our subject matter at hand. Now the Rebbe explains. So every day of the year, there were these bells that tinkled at the bottom of the coat, on the hem of the coat of the Kohen Gadol, and his avodah was done in such a way that v'nishma koila, yes, you heard the sound. Kevon, because shahaya Allah laseis imoy pnima ala kodesh gam as elu b'nei Yisrael shaseder avedasam knisasam lakodesh he bekol rash v'chule. Why does the Kohen Gadol have to wear a coat that has bells, that make noise, and that continue to make noise throughout the Avodah? Because, as the Rebbe said earlier, the Kohen Gadol is not just going in as a private citizen, he's carrying all of Bnei Yisrael into the Kodesh with him, and among them are people who are not yet on the level of Shem Havaya. They are not yet on the level of that exalted level where there's no noise, where it's called the Mamadaka. They're still on that level of Elikim. It's a lower level of manifestation. They're still dealing with their Nefesh HaBahamis, or perhaps only dealing with their Nefesh HaLokis. And now the Rebbe goes further and he says, and alluded in the fact, that the bells were on the bottom of the coat. They were on the hem of the coat. Ki inyan v'nishma koilei kashor el hamadregas hatachtonos shebe Yisrael. Because this avodah of noise, of ra'ash, is connected to those who are doing avodah that are still on the bottom of the coat, on the hem of the coat. She'avodasam hi mitzad harichuk. That their spiritual work is still being fueled by a sense of alienation and distance from Hashem. And therefore the Torah warns that this noise has to be heard, and only then will the Kohen Gadol not die. The Rebbe underscores the words klalus chayusay, that the entire life force of the Kohen Gadol is connected to this noise, meaning is connected to his obligation to those Jews who are like at the hem of his coat. And if there is not, if he goes into the Kodesh and he's not wearing the coat that has the belt, if this part of his service is not intact, because he doesn't want to include in his service these types of Jews, because they are like in the category of the hem of the coat. Even if it's for a very holy reason, he doesn't want to include these Jews because he wants to go up to the next level where the service of God is in the quiet, still, small voice. But even if that's the reason, then he is, God forbid, annihilated. He's mispateles. He goes bye-bye. He dies. Ki hashleimos shel klal Yisrael tluya ba'avoda hakaileles kol shishim ribei shebei Yisrael. Because the fruition of his avoda with klal Yisrael depends on that avoda, including every single one of the 600,000 major souls to which we are all connected. Like it says, Mirashechem Shiftechem, and this is from Parshas Re'eh, famously, all the way from the heads of your tribes, until the simple folk who are wood choppers and water carriers. Everybody has to be included. Hey, however, but this is true when we're talking about the avodah of the Kohen Gadol throughout the year. When he enters and does his service only in the holy, only in the Ayam Mayid. Because on that level, there is place to still be discriminating between different levels of Jews. There is still place to qualify and quantify from the heads of your, the very most important people of every tribe to the woodcutters and the water carriers. And therefore there is place in that avodah to be done with noise, and it should be heard. Masha Inkain avodas Kohen Gadol b'Yom Kippurim b'Kodesh HaKadoshim he l'lo rash. But in contradistinction, the service of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur that is done in the Holy of Holies is without noise. He does not wear that coat. He does not wear that vestment. He does not wear the belt. Ki bizman zeh, because at that time on Yom HaKippurim, called Yisrael kimalachim he. All of Bnei Yisrael are considered angels. Yeshnas galos biskashrus ha'atzmi shel kol Yisrael makadosh baruch hu. There is the revelation of the connection, the essential connection between all of Bnei Yisrael and God. The kevan shekol echad ve'echad miYisrael afilu elu hashayachim l'shuli amil oimdim az betachlis hakiruv v'zachdus emelukus. And because every single one, you could see that the Rebbe underscores kol echad ve'echad miYisrael, because every Jew, even those who are in the level of being on the hem of the Kohen Gadol's coat, but at Yom Kippur, they find themselves standing in the closest proximity and uniting essentially with Hashem. Yechida liyachdecha, one people united with God's oneness. Hinegam knisasam l'kodesh hakadoshim ayidei Kohen Gadol. So they're going in, all of us going in to the Kodesh HaKadoshim through the Kohen Gadol going in, Eina kirochik shenase karev. This is not like someone who is far who comes near. Va'azai hadavar naase barash. When you're far and you come near, the only way, if you're drowning in the ocean, the only way for you to reach the shore is to splash and is to raise a cry and is to call out emergency and so on and so forth. But in Yom Kippur, nobody is far. So there's no rush. Ella betachlis habitul. Here there is simply complete abnegation, and it's bekol demama daka. And it's with the still, small, soft voice. What's interesting is that it looks like by the Rebbe, every day was Yom Kippur, because he categorically eschewed the term kiruv rechekim, to bring close those who are far. For the Rebbe, nobody was far. Every day is Yom Kippur. Every day when he looks at a Yid, he sees into the atzmos of the Yid. There are no Yidden at the bottom of the hem. Vav.
This week's Living Torah was, I don't know if you saw it, it was amazing. It's absolutely necessary to see. It's amazing. And it's exactly about this. It's fantastic.
Thank you. I know what we're all going to be doing as soon as we can. Thank you, Chani. Vav. Al Pikola now, so based on everything we've said above, Yuvan Gam Hachiluk Ben Shitas Haramban, She'im Lenoy Yasam Kamin Tapuche Zahav, Lashitas Rashi Shabanidun Didan, Srichim Liyos Rimoinim Lenoy. Now once we understand the bell factor, now we're in a position to understand the decorative factor. And why is it pomegranates? And why does the Ramban opine that it should have been apples? Yisrael nimshlu hein litapuach vehein lirimay. Rebbe explains that Bnei Yisrael in different places are compared both to an apple and to a pomegranate. The difference, however, is as follows. When you analogize the Jews to apples, you're talking about Jews at the height, at the crest, at the zenith of their greatness. And the pomegranate, on the other hand, is more appropriate as an analogy to Jews who are kind of, have fallen in their level. And here the Rebbe quotes from the Shir HaShirim, Keplach harimoin reikascha, that your brow is like a split open pomegranate. And then the commentary says, reikonin shebecha. The Gemara Brachas also cites this. This is a reference to the empty Jews. What does it mean, empty Jews? Empty of mitzvahs. Ella, the Gemara says, but even the Jew is considered reikon, empty. That Jew too is full of good deeds. Like the Gemara says there, even the empty ones that are among you are filled with good deeds, like a pomegranate is filled with seeds. So on Rosh Hashanah, we evoke both the way in which we are the apple of Hashem's eye, and we are the highest, and we also evoke the way in which, despite all of our flaws, we are filled with good deeds, as the Rimain is filled with seeds. Va'al Kain, Beperish Rashi, Pshuta Shel Mikra. So therefore, once you understand the symbolism in the apple versus the pomegranate, the Ramban is opining, why not put an apple there for decorative purposes? Whereas Rashi stands his ground that it was a pomegranate. Va'al Kain, Beperish Rashi, Pshuta Shel Mikra. So therefore, Rashi, whose stated mandate is to explain Pshuta Shel Mikra, Hainu Kafisha Yisrael Nirim Bepashtos B'Chitzonius. He's coming to explain how Jews appear externally, Bepashtos, simply speaking. Hine Yehudim Elu Shebeshuli Hami'il Nirim B'Dargas Reikonin. So at first blush, the the Jew who's at the hem of the coat seems to be more aligned with a pomegranate. And therefore, Rashi opines that the decoration was pomegranate. Chani's asking, why is the apple aligned with the greatness or the completeness of the Jews? So that is also based on another pasuk of Shir Hashirim, that we are like the apple of Hashem's eye, meaning the most important thing, the most consummate thing. So that's where that symbolism comes from. So therefore, there has to dafka be pomegranates, to show, to teach, shagam hare konin, that even the so-called empty Jews, vafilu ela shelamata mizeh, and even those on a lower level, afilu poisha Yisrael, even the ones who sin, nichnesu im hakayin gadol ela kodesh. They too entered with the Kayin Gadol into the holy. Vehem Chelek miklal Yisrael. They are part of Bnei Yisrael. The Yisera Mizu, and even more so, Hem Maleim mitzvahs kerimain. They are filled with mitzvahs like the pomegranate. Ach beperish Ramban. The Ramban, on the other hand, who wrote in his Akdama about his Perush, Sheba Yeshnam Loi Rak Inyane Pshat Elagam Devarim Ne'imim Liyoidim Chain. The Ramban says about his Perush that it's not just the simple explanation that he brings, but in his Perush there are pleasant explanations for those who recognize grace of Hashem. The word Chain, which means grace, is an acrostic for Chachmais Nistares, hidden aspects of Chachma, of knowledge. So the Ramban, who describes his Perush as being composed of Chen, of Chachmais Nistares, Mudgeshes HaPnimiyah Shel Yisrael. So he is underscoring not the veneer, not the facade, what it looks like when you look at a Jew at first blush, but what's going on within the Jew. Umitzad ein liyehudi kol shayches lachet. And on the pnimius level of a Jew, on the innermost level of a Jew, there is no connection between a Jew and chet b'chlal. As we know, it says va'amech kulam tzadikim. It's one of the 10 psukim. Your entire nation are tzadikim. And now we're in a position to understand another difference between the Ramban and Rashi. And that is the Ramban opines that the tinkling of the bells was as a hachana, was as a preparation, was like asking permission to go in. And it's not an aspect of the actual service. Because the entrance of the Kohen Gadol to the Kodesh, af betura shaliach shel Klal Yisrael, even as an emissary of all of Klal Yisrael, he bedargas avodas hasadikim bekol demamadaka. Because the Ramban sees every Jew as an apple. In other words, on the innermost level, we are all consummate, we are all complete, we are the apple of Hashem's eye. And therefore, when the Kohen Gadol takes us all in with him, it's all on the level of tzaddikim. There's no alienation. There's no separation between us and Hashem. It's avodas tzaddikim. And that avodah is done silently. V'zuhi kushiyosai aliba de perish ve'im l'noy yasa kemin tapuchei zahav. Now we can understand what's really bothering Ramban when he questions Rashi, who says it was for decorative purposes alone, but it was a pomegranate. And the Ramban pushes back and says, why shouldn't it be an apple? But be'im harimainim boy loy l'shem shimush elakadei lahabia es yofiam umalasam shal Yisrael l'noi, because the Ramban is asking, since Rashi is telling us that the remaining of the pomegranates are not for any functional purpose. You're not putting the bells in the pomegranate, but rather it's for decorative purposes. And what does it mean, decorative purposes on the cloak, the coat of the Kohen Gadol? It means you want to showcase the beauty and the exalted level of the Jews. Yesh lahadgish lo yes hamayla hamurumezes berimoin elas ha'ilu shel Yisrael mitzat pnimius. Asher kol echad miYisrael hu b'tapuach zav ve'ein hu reikan chas v'shalom. So the Ramban is saying, hello, this is not just like any old decoration. This is pregnant with tremendous meaning and symbolism. It's about broadcasting the beauty of every Jew that's going in with the Kohen Gadol. So it should be apples. It shouldn't be pomegranates. Balderech Masha b'Menorah. And it should be like the Menorah. Sheshivas neraseh v'ramzim al b'nei Yisrael mischalkim l'sheva madregos ba'ovdei Hashem. That the seven kanim, the seven arms of the Menorah, all allude to the seven levels of the Jews as they are all Ovdei Hashem. And hayu b'chol ner kimin tapuchim. And on each branch of the Menorah, on each arm of the Menorah, there were apples. Zayin, Amnam, however, Af al pi shebepashtos bechitzonius havoida ba'ofen shel v'nishma koilai pechusa b'ma'alosa min havoida b'kol d'mamadaka. Okay, but this is what the Rebbe does, right? He takes us in one direction and then he says, oh, wait a minute. Now we're going to go in the opposite direction and you're going to find an even deeper level. So even though bipashtos on the simple level and bechitzonius on a more external level, the avoida that makes noise, the avodah of Rash, is on a lower level than the avodah of Kol Dema Daka, the still small voice. The Chol Zois Yesh Ba Ba'avodah B'Rash, Maila Gam B'Yachas LaAvodah B'Bittul. But still in all, there remains a superlative Maila, an advantage in the avodah that is done with a lot of tumult and a lot of noise over the avodah that is with a still small voice. Why? Ha'avodah b'kol d'mamadaka hi behagbala. The avodah that is done, organized, quiet, efficient, no drama, no screaming, no flaying with the limbs. The problem with this is that it's ba'ofen shel or bekeli b'hisyashvos. It's with hagbola. It's with definition. It's with parameters. It's with borders. It's measured. But there's a maila to that which cannot be contained, which cannot be measured. This avodah, it's ba'ofen shel or bekeli b'hisyashvos. You can fit all the lights into a container. That means it's finite. Masha Einkein, in contradistinction, but when you're talking about hearing the noise, the messiness, the urgency, the emergent quality of the person who is running for their life, who is running towards Hashem, away from the Ra, wants to do tshuva, hine harash hagadol gufa, the very noise, the very messiness, the very drama, moichiach, proves she'adam yaitze mehagbala shel hakelim ve'ein biyadei lahagbil es hispailos. It proves that this is a situation where the person leaves all of their normal parameters, their normal limitations, their normal kalim, their normal comportment, their manners, their mannerisms. It's all gone. Because there's such a depth and such an urgency to what this person is going through. And therefore, it expresses itself in a cry and an uproar. And this is one of the reasons. This is one way of understanding the famous teaching in the Gemara Brachos that in the place where Bali Tshuva stand, a complete tzaddik can never stand there. Ki dafke birash, because it's specifically through the noise and the tumult sheba avodas hatshuva that is inherent and endemic to the work of teshuva, Mizgala habligvol shel haneshama. It's dafka only in that kind of avoda that the infinity of the neshama is revealed. And so the Rebbe has now answered the question of why Rashi opines as he does and why Ramban holds as he does. And now the Rebbe is going to give us an additional beautiful hayra here. ומכל הנ"ל ישנה hayra מיוחדת לדורנו זה, dara de'ikvisa de'mashicha. And from all of the above, there is a special hayra, special lesson for our generation, which is the generation of ikvisa de'mashicha, which is usually translated as, you can already hear the heels, the footsteps of Mashiach. But I saw in one place that this was translated as kind of like the hem, like the rustling already. I don't know. Yeshnam kama hatayanim. The Rebbe says there are those who claim, Hein emes, it's true, shemitzat shval hamatzav shel derinu yesh hechrach l'sasek barbatzas hatayra v'hachazakas hayadas. Can you close the door? Thank you. It's true that because of the low level of our generation, we all have to engage in the work of spreading Torah and strengthening Yahadus. The aim la'adam l'stapik b'yeshiva b'toich arba amaisa b'afilu b'arba amay shel Torah u'lahamtin ad she'achirim yifnu ela v'yivakshuhu. And there's already an understanding, the Rebbe says, that it's not enough for a person to sit in the yeshiva, in the Dalet Amos, in the 4 cubits of their learning, even if they're learning Torah, and to wait until somebody comes to them and asks them because they have a question in Torah or mitzvahs. No. There's a dawning that there's a necessity lahafitz Torah v'chula. Elayesh latseis chutza, we have to go out to chutza, outside of the normal confines of where you would think you would find observant Jews. Limtzai sham Yehudim nidachim, to find the estranged Jews, and to, with Hashem's help, guide them to do teshuvah. But the Rebbe says, but even those people that are ready to agree that there's necessity to do this, ach mahu, but they claim, mahu ha'hechrek lasik basiyazu b'kol rash gadol. Why do you have to be so noisy about this? Why with the tanks, with the mitzvah tanks, with the music, with the with the billboards, with the flamboyant way in which Chabad does things? It should be b'kol d'mamadaka. Be more dignified about this. Be more quiet. Be more subtle. What are you taking out full-page ads in the New York Times? Why do you have to go out to the streets and to announce loudly that you should put on tefillin? That they should affix mezuzahs on their doors, be it nut tzedakah, they should give tzedakah. In other words, why are you making such a big tumult about all the 10 mitzvahs? We never found this kind of lahat means when you're very inflamed, this kind of enthusiastic, maybe even rambunctious behavior in previous generations. This is not what we did. This is not how Jews conducted themselves. And the Rebbe says, my answer to this is, according to all the simanim that are listed in the Gemara in Maseches Saita about the end of days right before Mashiach comes, we can see when we look at what the description is about what's going to be happening in the generation before Mashiach comes, we could see the Rebbe says we are in that time. We are in a place that is not that exalted. We're not in such good shape as a people. We're in Shulei HaMe'il. We're at the hem of the coat. Ba'alkein yesh ladas. Therefore, we need to know and we need to remember that on the hem of the coat of the Kohen Gadol was not just pomegranates. There were bells, and bells make noise. Hainu, meaning that bringing this demographic, this type of Jew, bringing them El HaKodesh, bringing them metaphorically into the holy, meaning them, bringing them to Yiddishkeit, Tachas Kanfei Hashchina, under the wings of Hashem's presence. Nikva Liyos Ba'ofen Shel V'Nishma Kolan was established to be done with noise. V'adraban, on the contrary, Tachlis Ha'ilohi Dafka B'Rash Sheba'avodas HaTshuva. And as already said, the highest level of avodah is the noisiness of the teshuvah. The Inyan Neisaf was that. And the Rebbe says, and one more point, we're now in the last Seif, in Seif test. Kasher Roim Anu, when we see She'etel Oivre Ritzona Yeshne Kol Hamayna Shel Roimi, when we see that amongst those who are contravening the word of Hashem, who are trespassing Torah mitzvahs, there's a lot of noise. The Rebbe is using a term from the Gemara Makkos, Kol Hamayna Shel Roimi, the noise made by the crowds of the Roman legions. Basically, the Rebbe is saying that everybody who's going about their business in the larger world is making a lot of noise. They're not doing it quietly. Today, we could say it's all over social media. It's done with a splash. It's not like this stuff that's being done is being done behind closed doors, quietly, in dignified fashion. No, it's being done loudly. All the things that are being done that are contra to Torah are not being done in the most private of all rooms. No, they're being done with great fanfare, and they're being publicized very widely and very loudly. Azai, therefore, then when you find yourself in such a situation, haderek levatel as ruach hasa'ara shel hasitra achra hi b'mina b'dugmasa. The Rebbe says, so the way to fight the searing wind of the sitra achra, of the other side, of the contra side, is to fight fire with fire, to fight it in like fashion. And the Rebbe now here quotes from the Gemara, Mineu be Ava leshte be narga. From the trees themselves is taken the axe which will chop them down. Meaning you co-opt the force that is contra to cut down that force. It's a different way of saying fighting fire with fire. You use the same medium. Hainu, meaning, just like we see that what those people who are making noise about the bad things, so in the same way, those who are doing Hashem's will should also be with noise. And where should we do this? We should make noise in the street. We are the legions of the Romans, as it were. We're those who are godless or heretics or scoffers or irreverent or just plain not interested. But there's a noise out in the street. There are legions of Romans, quote unquote, engaging in all kinds of behaviors. We have to get out there and we have to make the noise of Hashem. And this will lead to the fulfillment of and this is also from the Gemara, that just like those who trespass God's will, so it will be for those, how much more so for those who follow God's will, that Bnei Yisrael will sit in quiet and completely secure al admasam, on their land, meaning Eretz Yisrael. V'zois al yedei zeh she'yitaka b'shofar gadol, and this will happen through the agency of the blowing of the great shofar, as Yeshayahu described what will happen before Mashiach comes. Dafka al yedei kol, and this will be specifically through noise. Kol mevaser ba'omer. These are words from what we say on Hoshana Rabbah. That behold, there will be a voice, there will be a sound that will come to tell us that Mashiach is coming. Mevaser hageula will come to notify us of the geula, and may this be bekarav mamash. May this be speedily in our days. And the sikha that we have just learned is l'schus a refuah shlema for Harav Yosef Yitzchak ben Sima Chasya, that Hashem should grant him arichas yamim v'shanim tovos and ni'imos, and in full health. It's Hashem. Questions or comments or anything somebody wants to add or say or share?
No,
Thank
thank you.
Okay, then.
Thank you, Rivky. This was great. The Rebbe loved the Rosh, but yet had such a quietness in himself. You saw that balance of the Rebbe so much, and just one, the Rebbe was quiet. I don't know how to explain it. There was a quietness, but they were he loved the Rosh. Anyway.
If we're allowed to like discuss the Rebbe's personality, if we're allowed to say that, the Rebbe was, b'tivoi, more of an introvert, but for his avodah, he forced himself to become that extrovert. But you're right that his essence was quiet. But yes, he wanted the Rosh. He wanted us to make a Rosh. That works well for us with big mouths.
Well,
Rivka,
the world says the opposite. Be quiet.
Right, exactly. Shah still. Mach nicht kein Tummel.
I think the Hanukkah campaign that the Rebbe started so many years ago was really the beginning of Shout It Out Loud. It was so hard at the beginning. We had to fight all battles and people, and now it's just everywhere. Nobody even questions it. Everybody has menorahs in the cars, and you can't make enough fuss about it. It's and it applies to everything now. It's what we have to do, and the Rebbe said it years ago. So just carry on and do that.
Even the tefillin campaign met with a lot of resistance. You're putting on tefillin on people outside of a shul, and do they wash negelwasser? What are they thinking? And like doing it in the public forum, like what are you doing in the public, sector? Go back.
Everything was a battle. Everything was a battle at the beginning.
Yeah. All right, Kol Tov, everybody. We got noise to make.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
you.
Kol Tov. Have a good day and a good week and everything wonderful.
Amen.
Thank you.